The billionaire laughed as the crowd mocked her champagne, dripping from her stained uniform, while his fiancée smiled in triumph, certain the waitress would break. With a cruel grin, Julian Blackwood raised a Mozart aria and offered a humiliating deal: sing it perfectly or lose everything. What no one in the room realized was that this was not a joke to her. As the orchestra waited and the elite sneered, the woman they dismissed as disposable was standing at the edge of a life she had buried for 3 years. And in the seconds before she opened her mouth, the most powerful man in New York had no idea he was about to destroy his own future. The Obsidian Room was not merely a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth. And tonight, the audience was particularly cruel. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears, casting a fractured light over the politicians, oil tycoons, and tech moguls who dined on caviar that cost more than a compact car. Elena Vance adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. It scratched her neck, a constant reminder of her station. She was invisible here, a ghost moving between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing silver plates, and absorbing the casual disdain of the city's elite. "More wine, now," a voice snapped. Elena turned, keeping her eyes lowered. "Of course, Miss Thorne." Isabella Thorne sat at the center table, the undisputed queen of the evening. She was wearing a red silk dress that looked like it had been poured over her body, and on her finger sat a diamond heavy enough to bruise. Beside her sat the man who had bought it, Julian Blackwood. Julian was staring at his phone, looking utterly bored. He was 32, with the kind of sharp, devastating features that graced the covers of Forbes and GQ in the same month. He was the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a man who moved markets with a whisper. Tonight, however, he looked like he would rather be anywhere else than listening to his fiancée complain about the garnish on her lobster. "Julian, are you listening to me?" Isabella hissed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the tablecloth. I said, "The soprano they hired for the wedding is distinctively average. I won't have mediocrity at the Blackwood Thorne wedding. It reflects poorly on my brand." Julian sighed, finally sliding his phone into his tuxedo pocket. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and tired. "Isabella, it's a wedding, not a coronation." Clear's throat. "No one is going to be critiquing the vibra of the wedding singer while they're drunk on vintage champagne. I will be." Isabella countered icily. Elena approached with the bottle of Pont Noir. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Being this close to Julian Blackwood was unnerving. It wasn't just his wealth, it was the intensity of his presence. He seemed to see everything, even when he wasn't looking. As Elena leaned in to pour a waiter from the kitchen, rushed past, bumping her shoulder hard. It happened in slow motion. The bottle slipped. The dark red wine arched through the air and splashed violently across the bodice of Isabella's pristine red dress. The gasp from the surrounding tables sucked the air out of the room. "You incompetent little rat!" Isabella shrieked, jumping to her feet. The chair screeched against the marble. "Look what you did! This is custom couture." Elena went pale. I am so sorry, Miss Thorne. I was bumped. I don't care about your excuses." Isabella grabbed a cloth napkin and scrubbed frantically at the stain, which only made it worse. She turned her fury on Eleanor, her eyes blazing with malice. "Manager, where is the manager? I want this girl fired. No, I want her blacklisted from every service job in Manhattan." Marcus, the floor manager, materialized instantly, sweating profusely. "Miss Thorne, Mr. Blackwood, I apologize profusely. Elena, get to the kitchen immediately. You're done. Wait." The single word cut through the chaos like a knife. Julian Blackwood remained seated, swirling the remaining wine in his own glass. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Julian, don't interfere." Isabella snapped. "She ruined my dress." "It was an accident," Isabella. Julian said, his voice deep and smooth. "And honestly, the wine matches the silk. It's an improvement." Someone at a nearby table stifled a laugh. Isabella's face went crimson, not from the wine, but from rage. "Are you defending the help?" Julian looked at Elena for the first time. Clear's throat. He saw the frayed collar, the tired eyes, the strands of brown hair escaping her bun. But he also saw something else. She wasn't crying. She was standing straight, her jaw set. She was terrified. Yes, but she wasn't broken. It intrigued him. "I'm just saying," Julian drawled, leaning back. "That firing her seems boring. We're celebrating our engagement, aren't we? Let's have some fun." "Fun, Elena," whispered her voice, barely audible. Julian stood up. He towered over her. He walked over to the small stage, where a string quartet had just finished playing a light serenade. On the music stand, there was a piece of sheet music left open. An incredibly difficult aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute, specifically the Queen of the Night aria, which the hired soprano had struggled with earlier that evening. Julian picked up the sheet music. He looked at Isabella, a cruel glint in his eye. He was tired of Isabella's pretensions, tired of her claiming to be a patron of the arts when she couldn't tell Mozart from Madonna. He wanted to highlight the absurdity of her elitism. "Tell you what," Julian said, his voice projecting across the silent restaurant. "Isabella says you have no talent, no worth, just a clumsiness that ruins expensive things. But I believe talent can hide in the dirtiest places." He walked back to Elena and shoved the sheet music into her hands. "Sing this," Julian joked, his tone dripping with dark sarcasm. "This is Derrila Rasha, the Queen of the Night. It requires a high F. If you can sing this, and I mean really sing it, not just screech like a dying cat, I won't let Marcus fire you." He paused, a wicked smile curling his lips as he looked at the shocked crowd. He decided to raise the stakes to an impossible level, just to mock the sanctity of his own engagement. In fact, Julian announced loudly, "If you can sing this Mozart perfection, I'll dump Isabella and marry you instead." The room gasped. Isabella's mouth fell open. "Julian, that is not funny. I'm deadly serious." Julian lied, his eyes locking onto Elena's. "Go on, waitress. Sing for your supper. Sing for $1 billion. It was a cruel joke, a billionaire mocking a servant by giving her an impossible task. Everyone waited for Elena to crumble, to drop the paper, and run to the kitchen in tears. Elena looked down at the sheet music. The notes swam before her eyes. "Deharash, the vengeance of hell boils in my heart." She knew these notes. She knew them better than she knew her own name. Elena looked up. She didn't look at Isabella. She looked straight at Julian Blackwood. "Does the orchestra know the key?" she asked softly. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "What the key?" Elena said, her voice gaining a strange, resonant strength. "Dim minor. Do they know it?" The silence in the obsidian room shifted. It changed from the awkward silence of second-hand embarrassment to the confused silence of unexpected defiance. Julian blinked. He had expected her to beg for her job, or perhaps stammer an apology. He had not expected her to ask about the key signature. "They are the New York Philharmonic's backups," Julian replied slowly. His curiosity piqued. He gestured to the quartet and the pianist in the corner. "They know it." Elena nodded. She walked toward the small stage. Her cheap black shoes clicked against the floor, a lonely sound in the cavernous room. "Don't do this, Elena," a voice screamed in her head. "You promised you'd never sing again. You promised you were done with that life. You are Elena Vance, the waitress. You are not her. Not anymore. But the humiliation burned in her chest. The way Isabella had looked at her like she was trash, like she was something to be scraped off a shoe. It woke up a dragon that had been sleeping for 3 years, and Julian, his joke was cruel, but there was a challenge in his eyes that she couldn't resist. He thought she was nothing. She reached the piano. The pianist, an older man named Mr. Henderson, who often tipped her well, looked at her with pity. Clear his throat. Elena, dear, you don't have to do this. Just go to the back. D minor, Mr. Henderson. Elena said. Her hand rested on the piano lid. It wasn't shaking anymore. Fast tempo. Don't wait for me. I'll keep up. Mr. Henderson hesitated, looked at Julian, who gave a sharp nod, and then placed his fingers on the keys. The aggressive, turbulent opening chords of the aria crashed through the room. Isabella crossed her arms, a sneer plastered on her face, waiting for the screeching to start. Julian leaned against a pillar, swirling his drink, waiting for the joke to end so he could go home. Elena closed her eyes. She took a breath, and then she opened her mouth. The first note didn't just come out, it exploded. It was a spear of pure, crystalline sound that pierced the air with shocking power. Derilarasha cocked in Minimum Hudson. The vengeance of hell boils in my heart. Julian's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The sound was massive. It wasn't the thin, breathy voice of an amateur. It was a trained operatic colorer, rich, dark, and terrifyingly precise. The German diction was flawless. The emotion was raw, unfiltered rage, channeled through perfect technique. Elena wasn't standing like a waitress anymore. Her posture had shifted. Her spine was steel. Her hands were expressive, clutching the air as she delivered the Queen of the Night's furious command. The guests at the nearest tables lowered their forks, their mouths hanging open. Then came the difficult part, the legendary staccato run the high Fs. This was the graveyard of sopranos, the place where even professionals cracked. Elena hit the first high note with the precision of a laser. Oh, ah, 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 ah. It was perfect. It was bell-clear, resonant, and effortless. She spiraled through the arpeggios, her voice dancing with a terrifying agility. She wasn't just hitting the notes, she was attacking them. She was pouring 3 years of scrubbing floors, 3 years of hiding, 3 years of being invisible into a melody that demanded dominance. Julian Blackwood felt a chill race down his spine. The hair on his arms stood up. He had grown up in opera boxes. His grandmother was a patron of the Met. He knew what greatness sounded like. This wasn't just good. This was world-class. This was impossible. He looked at the woman he had just mocked. The messy bun, the stained apron, the cheap shoes. They all seemed to fade away. All he saw was the power radiating from her throat. She was glowing with a fierce, terrifying beauty. Isabella Thorne had gone pale. The sneer had vanished, replaced by a look of absolute horror. She wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. She was looking at a rival. Elena hit the final resolving cadence, holding the last note with a lung capacity that defied logic, letting the sound ring through the crystal chandeliers until the very air seemed to vibrate. Then she cut it off. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. It lasted for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. No one moved. The pianist, Mr. Henderson, was staring at his keys, his hands trembling. Eleanor stood there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline crashing through her system. The spell broke the reality of what she had just done, washed over her. She had revealed herself. She looked at Julian. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't bored. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. His dark eyes were wide, burning with a mixture of shock and something else, hunger. Slowly, Julian Blackwood began to clap. Just him, a slow, rhythmic clap. Then the man at table 4 joined in. Then the entire room. Within moments, the wealthy elite of New York were on their feet, erupting into thunderous applause, forgetting that she was the help. Forgetting the spilled wine, Isabella stood, frozen her face, a mask of fury. She grabbed Julian's arm. "Stop it. Stop clapping. She's just a trick pony." Julian shook her off without looking at her. He walked toward the stage. He moved like a predator stalking prey. Elena saw him coming. Panic seized her. "He knows or he will know." "Who are you?" Julian asked as he reached the edge of the stage. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual smooth veneer. That wasn't a waitress singing. "Who are you?" Elena stepped back, clutching her apron. I have to get back to work." "The deal was real," Julian said, climbing the steps onto the stage. He was mere inches from her now. She could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and rain. "I said, if you sang it, I'd marry you." The crowd quieted down, eager to hear the billionaire's next move. Elena looked into his eyes. "And I think we both know, Mr. Blackwood, that rich men make promises they never intend to keep." She turned and ran. She didn't walk. She sprinted off the stage, through the service doors and into the kitchen, leaving Julian Blackwood, standing alone under the spotlight, looking at the empty space where she had been looking more alive than he had in years. "Find her," Julian said to his bodyguard who had appeared at his side. "Sir, find out who she is," Julian commanded, his voice dark. "And bring her to my office tomorrow morning. I don't care if she quits. Find her." Elena Vance didn't stop running until her lungs burned and the gleaming skyline of Midtown was replaced by the grimy brick facades of Hell's Kitchen. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice before managing to unlock the peeling blue door of apartment 4B. She slammed it shut and leaned against it, sliding down until she hit the floor. The cheap laminate cooled her skin, but it couldn't cool the fire in her veins. She had sung. After 3 years of silence, after 3 years of burying Elena Vancouver, the prodigy, the rising star, the girl who was supposed to be the next Callas, she had sung in front of half of New York's high society. And worse, she had sung for Julian Blackwood. "Elena, is that you?" A soft, rasping voice came from the bedroom. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, composing herself. She stood up, smoothing her stained apron, and walked into the small room. Lying in the bed surrounded by medicine bottles and a humming dialysis machine was her younger brother, Leo. He was pale, his skin translucent under the harsh overhead light, but his eyes were bright. "Hey, Leo," Elena whispered, forcing a smile. "I'm home." "You're early," Leo said, coughing slightly. "Did Mr. Marcus let you go?" "Something like that." Elena lied. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing hair off his forehead. I quit." Leo's eyes widened. "Elena, the rent my treatment. I'll find another job tomorrow," she promised fiercely. "I'll scrub toilets if I have to. Don't you worry about the money. I'm going to get you that kidney, Leo." "I promised." Leo looked at her, seeing through the brave face. "You look different. You look like you used to before Mum died. Before the scandal." Elena looked away. The scandal. The night her life imploded. The night her voice cracked at the conservatory showcase because her water had been spiked, ruining her debut and her scholarship in one fell swoop. The rumors that followed drug use instability had been planted by a rival. She had lost everything, her reputation, her funding, and then her mother, to a heart attack induced by the stress of the debts. She had vowed never to sing again. Singing was dangerous. Singing destroyed things. "Go to sleep, Leo." She kissed his forehead. "I have to figure some things out." Across the city, in the penthouse of the Blackwood Tower, The atmosphere was far less domestic. Julian Blackwood stood looking out at the city lights, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. The penthouse was cold, modern, and empty, much like his life. "Sir, I have the file," a voice said. Arthur Julian's head of security and personal investigator placed a thin manila folder on the glass desk. Julian turned. That was fast. She wasn't hard to find. Once we ran a facial recognition scan against public records, Arthur said, "Her name is Elena Vance, age 24, currently employed or formerly employed as a server at the Obsidian Room. Clears throat, lives in Hell's Kitchen with a younger brother, Leo, who is in end-stage renal failure." Julian picked up the file. He flipped it open. No criminal record. But here is the interesting part. Arthur pointed to a clipped newspaper article from 3 years ago. Before she was Elena Vance, the waitress, she was Elena Vankova, a scholarship student at Juilliard Soprano, top of her class. Julian's eyes narrowed as he read the headline. "Prodigy meltdown. Vankova chokes on stage amidst drug rumors." "She didn't choke," Julian murmured, remembering the sound of her voice in the restaurant. "That woman has ice water in her veins. You don't sing the Queen of the Night like that, if you're unstable." "There's more," Arthur added. "The rumors that destroyed her career, they were traced back to a PR firm owned by the Thorne family. Julian froze. Thorne, as in Isabella's father, owns the firm. Isabella was also a student at the conservatory that year, wasn't she? A mezzo-soprano who didn't quite make the cut for the solo. A dark, cold rage settled in Julian's chest. It all made sense. Isabella, with her petty jealousies and infinite resources, had crushed a rival before she could even rise. And tonight, unaware of who she was mocking, Isabella had tried to do it again. Julian closed the file. The image of Elena, standing on that stage, defiant and magnificent, burned in his mind. He looked at the engagement ring Isabella had returned to him in a fit of rage earlier that night. She had thrown it at his head in the limo. He picked up the ring. It meant nothing to him. The merger with Thorne Industries was the only reason he had proposed. His board of directors was pressuring him to settle down to present a stable image to calm the investors. They wanted a Blackwood wife, but the contract didn't say the wife had to be Isabella Thorne. Arthur Julian said a plan forming in his mind. A plan that was reckless, dangerous, and absolutely perfect. "Prepare the car. It's 200 a.m., sir." "I know." Julian buttoned his suit jacket. "We're going to Hell's Kitchen." The knock on the door was heavy, authoritative. It wasn't the landlord asking for rent. It was the knock of someone who owned the building. Elena jumped from the couch where she had been counting crumpled dollar bills. She grabbed a baseball bat she kept by the umbrella stand and crept toward the door. "Who is it, Julian Blackwood?" The name hit her harder than the bat could have. She froze. "Go away, Miss Vance. I'm not here to fire you. I own the restaurant building, but I don't manage the staff. Open the door, or I'll have my security detail pick the lock. We need to talk." Elena weighed her options. She opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. Julian stood in the dingy hallway, looking ridiculously out of place in his tuxedo. His eyes scanned her face, noting the tiredness, the lack of makeup, the fear. "May I come in?" "No." "Very well," Julian said, leaning against the doorframe. "Then I'll discuss your brother's medical bills in the hallway where the neighbors can hear." Elena's grip on the door tightened. "What do you know about Leo?" "I know he needs a kidney. I know you're $60,000 in debt. I know you're working 3 jobs and drowning." He paused, his voice dropping an octave. "And I know that Isabella Thorne ruined your life 3 years ago." Elena undid the chain and pulled the door open. "Get in." She didn't offer him a seat. The couch was covered in laundry, so they stood in the tiny living room chinette. "What do you want?" Elena asked, crossing her arms. "You had your fun tonight. You proved your point to your fiancé. Leave me alone." "She's not my fiancé anymore," Julian said calmly. "I ended it an hour ago." Elena blinked. "Congratulations. What does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Julian began to pace the small room, his presence filling the space. "You see, Elena, I have a problem. My grandfather's trust, which controls the majority shares of Blackwood Dynamics, has a stipulation. I must be married by my 33rd birthday to take full control of the company. That birthday is in 3 weeks. Sounds like a rich person problem," Elena said dryly. "It is, but if I don't marry, the board can vote me out. They were pushing for Isabella because her father is a powerful ally. But I cannot marry Isabella. She is poisonous. I could have told you that." "Yes." Julian stopped pacing and looked at her. "I made a joke tonight, Elena. I said, 'Sing this and I'll marry you.' You sang it. You fulfilled the condition." Elena laughed. It was a harsh, incredulous sound. "You're insane. You can't be serious. I'm a businessman, Elena. I deal in transactions." He stepped closer. "I need a wife who is intelligent, poised, and who, quite frankly, has a reason to hate the Thorne family as much as I do right now. I need someone who can play the part of Mrs. Blackwood for 1 year. After that, we divorce. I keep my company. You get a settlement. I'm not a prop." Elena spat. "And I'm not for sale." "Everyone has a price," Julian said coldly. He pulled a checkbook from his inner pocket. He uncapped a fountain pen. Clear his throat. "How much is Leo's surgery? The best specialists the post-top care." Elena went silent. The name Leo hung in the air. "I can have him transferred to Mount Sinai Private Wing by morning," Julian said, his voice softening. "I can ensure he gets the best kidney specialist in the country. I can wipe your debt. I can give you your life back." Elena stared at the checkbook. It was a deal with the devil. She knew that. Julian Blackwood was dangerous. He was manipulating her desperation. But then she thought of Leo coughing in the other room. She thought of the 3 years of scraping by. "What are the terms?" she whispered. Julian didn't smile. "This was business. We marry in secret within 3 days, then a public wedding in 2 weeks. You live in my penthouse. You attend galas, dinners, and board meetings. You play the role of the woman who swept me off my feet. You make Isabella Thorne look like a distant memory." "And the singing," Elena asked. "Do I have to sing?" Julian hesitated. He remembered the power of her voice. "Only if you want to. But I suspect, Elena, that silencing that voice is what's actually killing you." Elena looked down at her hands. 1 year. 1 year. 10 million at the end of the contract, plus all expenses for your brother, regardless of what happens to us. Elena took a shaky breath. She looked at the man who had humiliated her, and then defended her, and was now offering to save her. "Write it down," she said. "Excuse me. The contract," Elena said, her eyes hardening. "I want it in writing, and I want a clause that says we have separate bedrooms. This is a business arrangement, Mr. Blackwood. I am not your lover. I am your employee." Julian's lips twitched. A spark of genuine amusement and respect lit up his eyes. Isabella would have thrown herself at him. "Elena was building walls," agreed, Julian said. "Arthur is outside with the papers. Shall we?" Elena looked toward her brother's bedroom door. "I need 10 minutes to pack." "Take your time," Julian said. "Welcome to the family future, Mrs. Blackwood. The twist begins." 3 days later, the City Hall ceremony was quick and sterile. No cameras, just Arthur as a witness, but the real storm began the following Monday. Elena stood in the massive walk-in closet of Julian's penthouse, staring at rows of designer clothes that had been delivered that morning. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform anymore. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer and white trousers, looking every inch the billionaire's wife. Julian walked in, adjusting his tie. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, he forgot about the merger, the board, and the lie. She looked stunning. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" "The press conference," Julian said, handing her a pair of sunglasses. "We're announcing the engagement and the wedding date. Is Isabella going to be there?" "Everyone is going to be there," Julian replied grimly. "And Elena, there's one thing I forgot to mention." Elena looked at him sharply. "What my grandmother, the matriarch of the Blackwood family. She's flying in from Paris." So Julian winced slightly. "She's the one who controls the trust. She's terrifying, and she hates liars. If she suspects this is fake, even for a second, the deal is off, and I lose the company." Elena felt her stomach drop. "You're telling me this now? You handled Mozart's Queen of the Night," Julian said, opening the door for her. "I figured you could handle an 80-year-old woman with a cane." "You have no idea," Elena muttered, putting on the sunglasses. They stepped into the private elevator. As the doors closed, Julian reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm. "Showtime, Mrs. Blackwood," he whispered. The elevator descended, carrying them down to the lobby, where a shark tank of reporters and a vengeful Isabella Thorne was waiting to tear them apart. The elevator doors chimed, signaling their arrival at the lobby level. It was a sound that usually meant freedom, but today it sounded like the bell at the start of a boxing match. "Chin up," Julian murmured, his hand resting protectively on the small of Elena's back. "Don't let them see you bleed." The door slid open, and the world turned white. Hundreds of camera flashes went off simultaneously, a strobe light assault that blinded Eleanor instantly. The roar of questions was deafening. "Mr. Blackwood, is it true? Who is she? What happened to Isabella Thorne?" Julian moved with the grace of a shark cutting through water, guiding Eleanor toward the podium, where a sleek microphone setup waited. Security guards formed a human wall, holding back the frenzied paparazzi. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained impassive. She was an opera singer. She knew how to wear a mask. She knelled the queens and heroines she had studied for years. "I am not Eleanor, the waitress," she told herself. "I am Eleanor Blackwood." They reached the podium. Julian raised a hand, and the room quieted instantly. His authority was absolute. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Julian began, his voice smooth and commanding. "I am here to introduce the woman who has captured my heart. The future Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor." He stepped back to let Eleanor stand in the light. She adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," she said. Her voice, trained, resonant, and clear, carried to the back of the room without effort. "I know you have questions." "I have one." The voice came from the side of the stage. The crowd parted as Isabella Thorne marched forward, looking like a vengeful goddess in Yves Saint Laurent. She wasn't holding a microphone, but her shrill voice didn't need one. "Tell them who you really are, darling," Isabella sneered, stopping just before the security line. She turned to the cameras, holding up a blown-up photograph. It was a grainy image of Elena from 3 years ago, looking disheveled and sick, leaving the hospital after the poisoning incident. "This is Elena Vankova," Isabella shouted triumphantly. "The disgraced Juilliard dropout, the junkie who couldn't handle the pressure. Julian Blackwood is marrying a drug-addicted cafe waitress." The room erupted. The reporters turned on Elena like a pack of wolves. "Is it true? Were you in rehab?" "Julian, did you know about this?" Julian's jaw tightened. He stepped forward to intervene, to pull Elena away, but she didn't move. She didn't shrink. Elena looked at the photo. Then she looked at Isabella. She remembered the fear she felt 3 years ago. She remembered the shame. But looking at Isabella now, desperate, cruel, and petty, Elena realized she had nothing to be ashamed of. She stepped closer to the microphone. "Yes," Elena said. The single word silenced the room again. Isabella blinked, her smirk faltering. She expected a denial. "My name was Elena Vankova." Elena continued, her voice, gaining power, ringing with the same intensity as her area. "And yes, 3 years ago I was hospitalized, not because I was a junkie, but because on the night of my debut, someone spiked my water with a sedative to ensure I would fail." She looked directly at Isabella. The cameras followed her gaze. Isabella went pale. "I lost my scholarship," Elena said, her voice trembling with controlled emotion. "I lost my career. I spent 3 years scrubbing floors and serving tables to pay for my brother's medical bills because my mother died of a broken heart trying to clear my name. I am a waitress, and I am proud of it. Because while people like Miss Thorne were buying dresses that cost more than my rent, I was learning what it means to survive." She took a breath, and for the first time she looked at Julian. He was staring at her with something akin to awe. Mr. Blackwood didn't fall in love with a socialite. Elena finished turning back to the press. "He fell in love with a survivor. And if anyone has a problem with my past, you can take it up with my husband." She stepped back for a heartbeat. There was silence. Then a lone reporter from the Times shouted, "That's a better story than the merger. Look this way, Mrs. Blackwood." The cameras flashed again, but the energy had shifted. They weren't attacking her anymore. They were worshipping her. Clear's throat. The Cinderella survivor narrative was gold. Isabella stood frozen, realizing she had just handed Elena the victory. Julian leaned in his lips, brushing her ear. That was magnificent. "Get me out of here," Elena whispered, back her legs finally starting to shake. "I think I'm going to throw up." Julian wrapped his arm around her waist, shielding her from the view. Arthur Carr. Now 2 weeks passed in a blur of fittings, florists and legal briefings. Elena moved into the penthouse, though true to the contract she slept in the guest wing. Yet the lines were blurring. They ate breakfast together. They debated politics over late-night tea. Julian was discovering that his waitress wife had a sharp wit and an intellect that matched his own. But the final test arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. Grand Maiare Genevieve Blackwood had arrived from Paris. The dinner was held in the private dining room of the penthouse. The table was set with Blackwood silver that dated back to the 19th century. Genevieve sat at the head of the table, a tiny woman with steel-grey hair and eyes that could cut glass. She used a cane, not for walking, but for pointing at things she disapproved of. So far she had disapproved of the soup, too salty, the weather, too American, and the flower arrangement, too go. Elena sat to her right, wearing a modest emerald gown. Julian sat opposite, looking unusually tense. So Genevieve said, placing her spoon down with a clatter, "You are the singing waitress." "I am Elena," replied evenly. "And you think you can handle the Blackwood estate? You think you can manage the board wives, the galas, the pressure?" Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "My grandson is impulsive. He likes shiny new toys, but marriage is an institution, not a game," Grandmother Julian warned. "Hush, Julian. I am speaking to the girl." Genevieve turned her gaze back to Elena. "Tell me, child, what do you know about running a household of this magnitude?" Elena looked at the formidable woman. She saw the test. Genevieve didn't care about pedigree. She cared about competence. "I know that your tea is cold," Madame Elena said softly. Genevieve blinked. "Excuse me." Elena stood up. She didn't ring the bell for the staff. She walked over to the side table where the silver tea service sat. The maid poured the water too early, Elena explained, checking the pot. Blackwood tradition dictates Earl Grey does it not. Earl Grey becomes bitter if steeped too long, and it loses its profile if served under 90 degrees. Elena deftly discarded. The old water reboiled the kettle on the induction warmer and prepared a fresh pot with practiced fluid movements. Her hands moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times yet, with the grace of a performer. She poured a cup and placed it perfectly, before Genevieve handle facing 300. "You worry that I cannot manage the staff or the details," Elena said, sitting back down. "But madame, I have spent 3 years serving the most demanding people in New York. I know how to anticipate needs before they are spoken. I know that detail is the difference between a meal and an experience. A socialite assumes things will be done. A waitress makes sure they are done." Genevieve stared at the tea. She took a sip. Silence stretched across the table. Julian held his breath. "It is perfect," Genevieve whispered. She looked up at Elena, a small, genuine smile cracking her stern face. "You have a worker's hands and a queen's bearing. Perhaps Julian is not as foolish as I thought." Julian let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Does this mean she has your blessing?" "We shall see," Genevieve said, tapping her cane. "But she survives dinner. That is a start." Later that night, the tension of the grandmother's visit gave way to something else. Eleanor was on the balcony, watching the rain hit the glass. She felt a presence behind her. "You were incredible tonight," Julian said. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His tie was undone. He looked human. "She hasn't complimented anyone since 1998. She just respects hard work," Elena said, not turning around. "Rich people usually don't understand that." "Is that what you think of me?" Julian asked, stepping closer. "That I'm just a rich person?" Elena turned. He was close. Too close. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "I think you're a man who is used to buying what he wants," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I think you're confused about what you bought." "I'm not confused, Elena." Julian reached out his hand, brushing her cheek. His touch sent a shock wave through her. "When I saw you on that stage, when I heard you sing, it wasn't a transaction. It was the first time in my life I felt something real." "Julian, the contract. Burn the contract," he whispered. He leaned in. Elena froze. Her mind told her to push him away, to remember that this was fake, that in 11 months she would be gone. But her heart, her traitorous heart, leaned forward. Their lips met. It wasn't a polite staged kiss for the cameras. It was hungry. It was desperate. It was the releasing of weeks of pent-up adrenaline and hidden attraction. Julian kissed her like he wanted to devour her, and Elena kissed him back with the passion of an aria. For a moment, the lie vanished. There was only them. But the moment was shattered by the ring of a cell phone. Julian pulled away, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. "Ignore it. It's your private line," Elena whispered, her pulse racing. "You have to answer." Julian groaned and pulled the phone from his pocket. He looked at the screen and his face went ice cold. "What is it?" Elena asked, sensing the shift. "It's Arthur." Julian said, his voice flat. "He says there's been a break-in at the law firm holding our prenup." Elena's blood ran cold. "The contract gone," Julian said, looking at her with horror. "Someone stole the hard copy. The one that outlines the payment, the fake dates, everything that proves this marriage is a fraud." Isabella Elena breathed. "If she leaks that to the press or my grandmother," Julian said, gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white, "I lose the company. And you look like a gold digger who was paid to marry me." "The wedding is in 2 days," Elena said, panic rising. "What do we do?" Julian looked at her. The softness was gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. But this time he wasn't fighting against her. "We go on the offense," Julian vowed. "She wants to ruin the wedding. Let her try." But she's forgetting one thing. "What she's dealing with a Blackwood now," Julian said, taking Elena's hand, "and his wife." The wedding of Julian Blackwood and Elena Vance was billed as the event of the decade. St. Patrick's Cathedral was packed with 500 guests, a sea of haute couture old money and political power. Outside, the streets were barricaded as thousands of onlookers and a legion of press tried to catch a glimpse of the Cinderella bride. Inside the cathedral, the air was thick with the scent of 10,000 white roses and an underlying current of unbearable tension. Elena stood at the back of the massive nave, her arm linked through Leo's. Her brother, looking healthier than he had in years, thanks to the dialysis and pre-op care Julian had arranged, was smiling. "You look like an angel, Elle," Leo whispered. Elena felt anything but angelic. She was wearing a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than she used to make in 5 years. It was a masterpiece of silk and French lace fitted to perfection. But beneath the silk, her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They hadn't found the contract. Arthur's team had scoured the city, but Isabella had vanished, gone to ground, until the perfect moment to strike. Elena knew with sickening certainty that the moment was now. As the pipe organ thundered to life, playing the opening notes of the bridal march, Elena took a deep breath. She wasn't just walking down an aisle, she was walking into a minefield. "Ready?" Leo asked. "No," Elena whispered. "Let's go." The walk seemed to take an eternity. Every face she passed seemed to be analyzing her, judging her. "Do they know?" Ahead at the altar stood Julian. He looked devastatingly handsome in his mourning suit, but his jaw was set hard. His eyes found hers, and for a brief second, the mask slipped. She saw the fear, the protective fury, and something else. That raw, hungry look from the balcony. She reached the altar. Leo kissed her cheek and took his seat. Julian took her hand. His grip was tight, almost painful. "She's here," Julian murmured, barely moving his lips. "Third row left side, wearing black." Elena didn't look. She focused on the Archbishop, an imposing figure in gold vestments, who began the ceremony with solemn gravity. The words washed over Elena. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." It all felt surreal. A multi-million-dollar play, and she was the lead actress. Then came the moment they had dreaded. If anyone here present knows of any just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever. Hold your peace. Silence filled the vast cathedral. A second passed, then another. Elena almost let herself breath. Click-clack, click-click. The sound of high heels on marble echoed sharply. "I do." Isabella Thorne stepped out of the pew. She wasn't wearing black. She was wearing blood red, the same color as the wine she had spilled that fateful night. She held a manila folder high in the air like a weapon. A collective gasp rippled through the church. Cameras shuttered frantically from the press gallery. "This marriage is a fraud." Isabella's voice shrilled, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. She marched up the center aisle toward the altar. "It is a business transaction designed to deceive the Blackwood board." "And you, Madame Genevieve?" Genevieve Blackwood, seated in the front row, froze. Her knuckles turned white on the head of her cane. Julian stepped in front of Elena, shielding her. "Security, remove this woman. Don't you dare touch me." Isabella snapped at the approaching guards. She reached the altar steps and whipped a document out of the folder. "I have the proof, right here. A prenuptial agreement dated 3 weeks ago." She began to read her voice, dripping with venom. Clause 4. A. The wife, Elena Vance, agrees to perform the duties of spouse for a period of no less than 12 months in exchange for a sum of $10 million payable upon divorce. Clause 4b. The husband agrees to cover all medical expenses for her sibling. Pandemonium broke out. Clear's throat. The cathedral turned into a circus. Reporters were shouting questions. Guests were standing on pews to get a better look. Isabella turned to Genevieve, triumph blazing in her eyes. Do you see, she's a Genevieve? A paid escort with a good voice. Julian hired her to secure his inheritance. Genevieve slowly stood up. The noise in the cathedral instantly died down. The matriarch looked from Isabella to Julian, and finally rested her gaze on Elena. Her expression was unreadable, terrifying stone. Is this true? Genevieve asked, her voice, quiet but cutting through the silence. Julian opened his mouth to lie, to spin it, to do what he always did, win the deal. But Elena stepped out from behind him. She looked at the hundreds of judging faces. She looked at Isabella's hateful smirk. She looked at the stained glass window above the altar, depicting martyrs who died for their truth. Yes, Elena said. Her voice was clear, projected the voice of the Queen of the Night. The crowd gasped again. Julian looked at her, stunned. Elena walked down 2 steps, so she was level with Isabella, then turned to face Genevieve. Yes, madam, Elena said, holding her head high. Every word in that contract is true. 3 weeks ago, I was drowning. My brother was dying and I had nothing. Your grandson offered me a lifeline, $10 million to play a part. I took it. I would take it again in a heartbeat to save Leo's life. I am not ashamed of sacrificing myself for the people I love. She paused, letting the words sink in. Clear's throat. The image of the greedy gold digger began to crack, replaced by something more complex. Then Eleanor turned to Julian. She stepped back up to the altar and took his hands. They were cold. But that was 3 weeks ago, Eleanor said softly, speaking only to him, ignoring the 1,500 people watching. We signed a contract for a performance, Julian. But somewhere between the press conference and the late-night tease, and the moment you kissed me on that balcony, I forgot my lines. Julian's eyes widened. Elena turned back to the crowd, her voice gaining strength, vibrating with emotion. I stood on a stage in his restaurant covered in wine and sang Mozart because I refused to be broken. And Julian Blackwood was the first man in my life who didn't try to silence me, but challenged me to sing louder. She reached out and took the contract from Isabella's stunned hands. Isabella is right. This paper says our marriage is a lie. Elena ripped the contract in half. The sound was shocking in the acoustics of the cathedral. She ripped it again and again until the $10 million agreement was confetti at her feet. I don't want the money, Elena declared. I'm breaking the contract. If you want to marry me, Julian Blackwood, you marry me. Elena Vance, from Hell's Kitchen. No deals, no timelines, just us. Silence hung heavy in the air. Everyone looked at Julian, the billionaire playboy, the man who never did anything without a guaranteed return on investment. Julian looked at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at Isabella, who was practically vibrating with rage at her plan backfiring. Then he looked at Elena. She was stripped bare, offering him nothing but the truth. Julian smiled. It was a real smile that reached his eyes, transforming his face. He stepped closer to Elena, invading her space, grabbing her waist with a possessiveness that made the crowd swoon. "You're fired," Julian whispered hoarsely. Elena's breath hitched. "What, as my employee? You're fired." He leaned down, his voice roughening with emotion. "But I'd like to hire you for a new position, a permanent one. I love you, Elena. I think I loved you the second you hit that high F." He kissed her right there at the altar, before the vows, before God, and the paparazzi. It was a searing, passionate kiss that told the world the contract meant nothing. When they pulled apart, breathless, a slow, rhythmic tapping sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. Genevieve Blackwood was clapping, a slow, deliberate applause. A smile genuinely amused broke across her stern face. "Well," Genevieve announced to the stunned cathedral. That was certainly more entertaining than the usual vows. "The girl has fired Julian. She ripped up $10 million in a church. She is either a fool or she is desperately in love. Either way, she is dangerous enough to be a Blackwood." She waved her cane toward the Archbishop. "Get on with it, man, before someone else interrupts." Isabella stood there, mouth agape. Her nuclear bomb had just turned into fireworks, celebrating the enemy. Julian turned to his head of security, Arthur, who was standing nearby. "Arthur, escort Miss Thorne out. And Arthur, hand the press that file we discussed." Arthur nodded grimly. He stepped toward Isabella, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket, the proof of the doping scandal 3 years ago. Isabella saw the envelope, realized what it was, and turned white. She didn't need to be escorted. She turned and fled down the aisle, the sound of her defeat echoing on the marble, followed by half the press corps, hungry for her destruction. Julian turned back to Elena, his eyes shining. "Where were we?" Elena smiled, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I think we were getting married." The Archbishop cleared his throat, looking slightly flustered, but relieved. "Ahem. Yes. Do you, Julian Blackwood, take this woman?" The rest of the ceremony was a blur of joy. When they walked back down the aisle, as man and wife, the cheers were deafening genuine. Elena caught Leo's eye as she passed. He gave her a thumbs up, crying openly. They reached the heavy oak doors of the cathedral. Before they stepped out into the flashing lights of the world, Julian pulled her into an alcove for 1 second of privacy. "We did it," he breathed against her forehead. "We did," Elena said. She looked up at him, feeling lighter than air. "So, Mr. Blackwood, what's our first official act as a real married couple?" Julian grinned, that wicked, charming grin that had started it all in the obsidian room. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, opening the cathedral doors to the roar of the city, "I believe I owe you a very long, very expensive honeymoon, and after that I'm going to buy you an opera house. And that, my friends, is how a spilled glass of wine led to the wedding of the century." Elena didn't just get the billionaire, she got her voice back. She saved her brother. And she proved that sometimes the biggest risks yield the most beautiful rewards. Isabella Thorne's reputation never recovered. But Elena Blackwood, she became a legend, not just for her voice, but for the heart that powered it. If you loved this story of underdog victory and epic romance, smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a drama-filled story time. Share this video with someone who believes in fairy tales with a twist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.